The antiseptic tang of disinfectant did little to mask the underlying scent of fear that clung to hospital rooms after midnight. Ethan McConnell lay tethered to the bed by a web of IV lines and monitor wires, the rhythmic beeping of the cardiac machine, a fragile metronome counting out borrowed time. He was 48 hours post-cardiac event, 48 hours since he'd flatlined twice on a gurney somewhere between a desperate 911 call on a desolate Nebraska highway and this sterile sanctuary in Sioux Falls. Discharge was scheduled for the morning, a return to a life irrevocably altered, though he hadn't yet grasped the full extent of that alteration. The room was dim, lit only by the ghostly green glow of the monitors and the faint spill of hallway light under the door. Outside, the hospital settled into its nocturnal rhythm. Hushed footsteps, distant intercom calls, the low hum of machinery keeping the fragile ecosystem of recovery running. Ethan felt weak, a profound, bone-deep weariness that sleep couldn't touch, punctuated by the dull ache where the stent now resided in his chest. He'd been staring at the ceiling tiles, counting the perforations, trying to reconcile the man who drove 18-wheelers across country with the patient whose heart had simply decided, mid-haul, to quit. Then, the door opened softly, startling him. Rhea stood silhouetted against the hallway light. His wife. She hadn't visited during the critical first 2 days. Too distraught, the nurse had relayed, a message Ethan had accepted with numb fatigue. Seeing her now, just hours before his release, felt odd. Wrong, somehow. She wore dark slacks and a silk blouse that seemed too formal, too composed for a late-night vigil at the bedside of her nearly departed husband. Her makeup was flawless. "Ethan, you're awake," she whispered, stepping inside and letting the door click softly shut behind her. The sound seemed unnaturally loud in the quiet room. She approached the bed, her movements hesitant, yet somehow lacking genuine concern. Her eyes scanned the monitors before settling on his face. "How are you feeling?" His throat felt raw. "Like I wrestled a truck and lost," he managed, his voice raspy. He watched her, his mind, sharpened perhaps by the proximity to death, analyzing details. The expensive watch on her wrist, new? The subtle scent of a perfume he didn't recognize. The way her gaze didn't quite meet his, skating over his face as if assessing damage rather than connecting. "The doctor said you're doing much better," she offered, pulling the visitor's chair closer but not sitting immediately. "Said you could go home tomorrow." "Yeah," Ethan rasped. He reached for the water pitcher on the bedside table, his hand trembling slightly. Rhea didn't move to help. He took a slow sip, the cool liquid soothing his throat. He thought of the single text message he'd received from her when he first managed to check his phone yesterday. The message that had sucker-punched the air from his already struggling lungs far more effectively than the heart attack itself. The screenshot, the zero balance, the chilling sign-off. "Rhea," he began, his voice gaining a little strength, fueled now by something other than physical recovery. "My phone. I checked it yesterday." She stiffened almost imperceptibly. "Oh?" "The joint savings account," he continued, keeping his eyes locked on hers, forcing her to meet his gaze. "The screenshot you sent. $61,000. Gone." He paused, letting the number hang in the sterile air between them. "You cleaned it out." Her carefully constructed composure wavered for a fraction of a second. A flicker of something? Guilt? No, more like annoyance, crossed her features before being smoothed away. She finally sat down, crossing her legs elegantly, adjusting the drape of her blouse. "We needed to talk about finances, Ethan. Things have been difficult." "Difficult," he echoed flatly. Difficult enough to empty every cent we had saved while I was unconscious, fighting for my life 2 states away. Difficult enough to send that message? He held her gaze. I deserve this after everything I've done for you. What did you mean by that, Rhea? She looked away then, focusing on a point somewhere on the wall beyond his bed. When she spoke again, her voice had shed the pretense of concern, replaced by a cold, hard edge he hadn't heard often, but recognized instantly as her true bedrock when cornered. Exactly what it says, she stated, her tone clipped. I deserve it more than you ever did. The words landed in the quiet room with the force of a physical blow. Deserve it. The money he earned driving endless miles, missing holidays, aging prematurely behind the wheel, the nest egg built from missed family dinners and lonely nights in cheap motels, the fund meant for repairs, for emergencies, for a retirement he now might not live long enough to see. Deserve it? He repeated, the word a choked whisper. For what? For waiting at home while I put my health on the line week after week. For the vacations, the spa days, the studio you wanted? Rhea finally looked back at him, and there was no remorse in her eyes, only a brittle defensiveness, a chilling sense of entitlement. You think those things came free? You think running that house, maintaining your life while you were gone for weeks at a time was easy? You were never really here, Ethan. Not for years. Always tired, always distant, always planning the next haul. I put my life on hold for your career, for this empty marriage. That money? That's severance pay, my severance pay for 15 years of service. The clinical detachment, the transactional framing of their shared life, stunned him into silence. He saw it then, the complete lack of empathy, the narrative she had constructed in her head where she was the victim, the long-suffering martyr finally claiming her due. He saw the years of perceived slights, the unspoken resentments, festering beneath the surface of their quiet, routine existence. He saw the woman he thought he knew evaporate, replaced by this cold, calculating stranger. He had thought, somewhere in the fog of pain and medication, that maybe it was a mistake, a panic reaction, something that could be explained, fixed. Now, looking into her hard, unapologetic eyes, he knew it wasn't. This was deliberate. This was final. His own anger, which should have been a roaring inferno, felt distant, banked by the sheer icy shock of her confession and the profound weariness that permeated his body. Fighting her now, yelling, pleading, it felt utterly pointless, a waste of the fragile energy he desperately needed to simply survive the night. He closed his eyes for a moment, the beeping of the monitor suddenly loud again. When he opened them, his gaze was steady, devoid of the anger or hurt she likely expected. It was empty. A vast, silent void where 15 years of shared history had just been erased. He simply stared at her. The silence stretched. Rhea shifted uncomfortably under his unwavering, empty gaze. The lack of expected reaction seemed to unsettle her more than any outburst would have. Well, she said finally, standing up abruptly, smoothing her blouse. I just wanted to see how you were. Rest up. She turned and walked to the door, her heels clicking softly on the linoleum. She didn't look back before pulling it shut, leaving him alone once more in the dim, sterile quiet. Ethan lay still, listening to the rhythmic beep of the machine tracking his damaged heart. He wasn't going home tomorrow. Home, he realized with chilling certainty, no longer existed. The woman who just walked out hadn't just taken his money. She had taken his past, torched his present, and tried to foreclose on his future. The exhaustion was still there, heavy and suffocating. But beneath it, something else stirred, a cold, hard nucleus of resolve. He reached, slowly, deliberately, for the call button to summon the nurse. He needed his phone. He needed to call Nate. The fight wasn't over. It hadn't even truly begun. Leaning heavily on his brother Nate, Ethan took slow, measured steps out of the hospital's automatic doors and into the crisp South Dakota morning air. The sunlight felt unnaturally bright, the sounds of traffic jarring after the muted quiet of his room. Nate, solid and dependable in his worn Carhartt jacket, gripped Ethan's arm firmly but gently, his expression a mixture of relief and barely suppressed anger. He'd arrived exactly when Ethan asked, no questions, just a grim nod when Ethan explained he wasn't going back to the house he shared with Rhea. The drive to Nate's suburban ranch-style home on the other side of Sioux Falls was mostly silent. Ethan stared out the passenger window, watching the familiar landscape roll by, feeling like a stranger in his own life. Nate, sensing his brother needed space, just drove, occasionally glancing over, his jaw tight. Nate's house was the antithesis of the meticulously decorated home Ethan and Rhea shared. It was comfortable, lived in, cluttered with the tools of Nate's construction trade, fishing gear, and evidence of his teenage daughter Megan's life. School books, a stray softball glove. It smelled like sawdust and coffee. Nate settled Ethan onto the worn leather sofa in the living room, fussing over him with uncharacteristic tenderness, fetching a blanket, pouring water. You need anything? Pain meds? Food? Nate asked, hovering. Ethan shook his head, the physical discomfort secondary to the churning in his gut. Just need to sit for a bit, Nate. Thanks. Nate finally seemed to accept that Ethan needed quiet. He pulled up a kitchen chair, sitting opposite him. Okay, he said, his voice low but intense. Talk to me, Ethan. What the hell happened? You almost die, and Rhea... She empties the bank account? Just like that? Nate slammed a fist onto his knee, startling them both. I swear, I ought to go over there right now. No, Ethan interrupted, his voice quiet but firm, cutting through Nate's anger. No confronting her, not yet. That's what she probably expects. Anger, shouting. We need to be smart about this. Nate subsided, though his knuckles were white where he gripped the chair. Smart how? She took everything. Maybe not everything, Ethan said slowly. The forensic, analytical part of his mind, the part that meticulously planned logistics for cross-country freight, beginning to push through the fog of shock and exhaustion. Nate, I need your help. Can you access our online banking? The joint accounts? See exactly when the money moved, where it went? He also asked Nate to discreetly retrieve his mail from the house later, emphasizing the need to avoid Rhea. Nate, practical and capable, immediately fetched his own laptop. Sitting beside Ethan on the coffee table, he logged into the shared online banking portal. Ethan provided the password, one Rhea hadn't changed, yet. The zero balance stared back at them, stark and brutal. But Nate methodically pulled up the transaction history. The $61,438.72 withdrawal was time-stamped the morning after Ethan had been airlifted, while he was still unconscious in the ICU. It wasn't a single transfer. It was multiple maximum limit transfers over several hours, likely designed to avoid triggering immediate large transaction alerts, moved to an external account number Ethan didn't recognize. Calculated. Deliberate. Son of a bitch, Nate breathed, scrolling further back. Ethan, look at this. He pointed to the screen. Smaller stuff. Going back months. 500 here, 1,000 there. Transfers out, always to that same external account number. And these withdrawals, ATMs near that spa she volunteers at. Cash back at high-end stores you never go to? Ethan leaned closer, his weariness momentarily forgotten, replaced by a sickening lurch in his stomach. He hadn't scrutinized the joint account closely for months, trusting Rhea handled the day-to-day while he was on the road, assuming her occasional spa management work covered her spending. Now, laid out in black and white, was a clear pattern. This wasn't a desperate act triggered by his heart attack. This was a long con. She had been siphoning funds methodically, bleeding him dry long before delivering the final blow. The message, "I deserve this," took on a new, more sinister meaning. It wasn't just about the marriage, but about premeditated financial plunder. He remembered small arguments, quickly dismissed, about missing funds she'd blamed on bank errors or expenses he'd forgotten approving. He remembered her insistence on handling certain bills herself, her vagueness about the spa's finances. The signs had been there, camouflaged by routine and his own exhaustion and trust. "She's been planning this," Ethan murmured, the realization settling like ice in his veins. "For a long time." Nate looked at his brother, seeing the deep hurt beneath the newfound steely resolve. "Okay," he said quietly. "Okay, Ethan. So what do we do? We go to the cops?" Ethan considered it. The bank had mentioned involving the police if it became a criminal matter. But a messy public fight might not be the smartest first move. He needed leverage. He needed professional help to navigate this, someone who understood financial complexities and marital law in South Dakota. "No," he said finally. "Not the police. Not yet." "We need a lawyer, a damn good one." Nate nodded immediately. "I know someone." "Chloe Preston. Handled my second divorce. Sharp as a tack, doesn't take crap from anyone, especially when finances get dirty. She'll know exactly how to handle this." Ethan looked at the damning transaction history on the screen, then met his brother's determined gaze. The path forward was suddenly clear, albeit daunting. The shock was solidifying into strategy. The victim was becoming the plaintiff. "Make the call, Nate," Ethan said, his voice gaining a new firmness. "Let's meet this Chloe Preston." The decision was made. The legal battle had begun. Chloe Preston's office was a study in organized efficiency. Sleek, modern furniture, meticulously organized files, and large monitors displaying complex legal documents. It projected competence and control, a stark contrast to the chaos Ethan felt simmering beneath his own forced calm. He sat opposite Chloe at her conference table a few days after their initial meeting, having provided her with copies of his hospital discharge papers, medical summaries documenting his periods of unconsciousness, and the transaction history Nate had pulled. "All right, Ethan," Chloe began, tapping a pen on a legal pad. "Based on the timeline and the clear evidence of your medical incapacitation during the large withdrawals, we have grounds to file a formal fraud complaint with the bank's internal investigation unit. It's still an uphill battle with a joint account, but the context is critical. I'll handle that communication today." She continued, outlining the next steps. "Simultaneously, I've filed the divorce petition and a motion for emergency protective orders regarding all known assets. We're also initiating formal discovery, demanding full financial disclosures from Rhea, including all bank statements, credit card records, investment accounts, and documentation related to her spa business for the last 3 years." "You think she'll comply?" Ethan asked, skepticism heavy in his voice. Chloe offered a wry smile. "Likely not fully or truthfully, potentially unauthorized transfers from this joint account over several months prior to Mr. Doyle's medical emergency, primarily directed to external at first. That's standard. But non-compliance has consequences, and it allows us to subpoena records directly from the financial institutions. It takes time, but the truth usually surfaces." Over the next week, Ethan focused on resting at Nate's, following doctor's orders while Chloe began her meticulous work. She kept him updated via encrypted email. The bank confirmed receipt of the account ending in 473B. Ms. Albright reviewed the documents, her expression unchanging, the practiced mask of customer service under pressure. I understand your concern, Mr. Doyle, Ms. Preston. As I'm sure you know, with joint accounts, access is typically unrestricted for both parties. Proving unauthorized access by a co-owner can be challenging. Fraud complaint and had begun their internal review, cautioning it could take weeks. Subpoenas went out. Then, we're aware of the challenges, Chloe replied smoothly. However, the timing coinciding precisely with Mr. Doyle's documented came the first significant breakthrough. Chloe called him, her voice tight with controlled urgency. Ethan, I need you to look at something. Medical incapacitation raises significant red flags regarding potential financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult. We are formally requesting a full fraud investigation into the... I've just received initial discovery responses from Rhea's side, mostly incomplete, as expected. But her attorney withdrawals made between these dates, she indicated the hospital stay, and request tracing information for the destination account, 473B. We will initiate an internal review, Ms. Albright said, typing notes into her system. We can place a temporary did provide statements for that external account the joint funds were transferred into. It's solely in Rhea's name. She alert on the destination account if it's within our network, pending investigation, but I cannot guarantee recovery of funds. Already emailed him the statements. Ethan opened the file, his gut clenching. He saw the large deposits corresponding to the dates he was in the hospital. But scrolling back, he saw what Nate had suspected, now confirmed. Regular deposits, varying transferred, especially if moved further. She provided them with the necessary fraud report forms. The meeting felt procedural, frustratingly constrained amounts, stretching back over 18 months. Consistent, calculated, and worse, numerous withdrawals and transfers out of that by regulations, but it was a necessary first step. Back in the sharp, modern efficiency of Chloe Preston's downtown law office later that day, the real digging began. Armed with Ethan's consent and the initial divorce filing which granted her account, many to untraceable cash withdrawals, but several significant electronic transfers to a business name. Vance Enterprises, LLC. Vance Enterprises? Ethan asked Chloe over the phone. Never heard of it. Neither subpoena power, Chloe started electronically pulling years' worth of detailed financial records, accounts Ethan knew about and potentially ones he had Chloe replied. Took some digging. It's a shell corporation. Minimal public footprint. Registered agent is Arthur didn't. Ethan sat with her, fueled by lukewarm coffee and a growing sense of dread, watching as Chloe navigated complex Finch. The name of the shady lawyer Camille had used in the other story's draft. Let's reuse him. Financial portals. Her focus absolute. She cross-referenced dates, amounts, merchant codes. The pattern Nate had spotted became undeniable here for consistency, or create a new one like Bernard Sadler. Let's stick with Finch for now. Hundreds, sometimes thousands, moved each month. Ethan was on a long haul, transferred systematically to that external account ending in 4, and the listed principal, Julian Vance. Julian Vance. The name meant nothing to Ethan until Chloe added, according 73B. Chloe quickly confirmed it was a personal savings account solely in Rhea's name, opened 18 months prior. Classic layering, Chloe murmured, highlighting a series of transfers. Moving money from joint to personal, then likely to Rhea's initial and likely incomplete disclosure forms, Julian Vance is listed as a distant cousin she occasionally provides family financial support to. A distant cousin receiving tens of thousands of dollars? It screamed fabrication. Chloe had from personal to somewhere else to obscure the trail. She pulled up statements for Rhea's known credit cards, maxed out already run preliminary background checks. Julian Vance had no easily traceable family connection to Rhea, lived a lifestyle seemingly unsupported by any, with cash advances taken frequently. She was living well beyond her means, and well beyond what her part-time spa income could legitimate reported income, and had recently leased a high-end apartment, lease co-signed by Rhea McConnell. He's the boyfriend support. But the house, Ethan said, the biggest asset nagging at him. She couldn't touch, Ethan stated flatly, the pieces clicking together. The someone better she implicitly mentioned. Almost that without me, right? We bought it together, but I refinanced it. Standard procedure in divorce discovery, certainly, Chloe agreed. And potentially a co-conspirator. Finch notarizing documents adds another layer. This smells like more than just hiding marital assets, Ethan. This could be structuring transactions to avoid reporting, maybe even money laundering depending on Vance's to run a title check on all real property. Chloe explained, already typing rapidly into another database. The county recorder's activities. But the worst was yet to come. As part of her standard due diligence in a divorce involving's office, let's see what the official record says about. Her voice trailed off. Her eyes narrowed real estate. Chloe had performed a title search on the house Ethan and Rhea had shared. The house Ethan had refinanced solely in his name just at the screen. Well, isn't that interesting? What? Ethan asked, leaning forward, his heart giving months before his heart attack. Ethan, Chloe said, her voice losing its professional detachment for a moment, replaced an uncomfortable lurch that had nothing to do with the stent. Chloe turned the monitor towards him. Displayed was by something akin to disbelief. There's a problem with the house, a big one. According to the county recorder's office, a quitclaim deed transferring ownership of your property was filed 3 weeks before your hospitalization. Ethan felt a quitclaim deed, filed electronically just 3 weeks before Ethan's heart attack. It purported to transfer full the blood drain from his face. What? That's impossible. I never signed anything. The deed transfers ownership of their marital home, address clearly listed, from Ethan McConnell and Rhea McConnell to one Julian Vance. The property, Chloe continued grimly, from Ethan McConnell to Julian Vance. It cites gift transfer between family members as the reason, and the signature, Ethan, it looks like yours. It was notarized by Arthur Finch. Silence identified in an attached and suspiciously brief affidavit signed by Rhea as her distant cousin, assisting with estate planning. Ethan stared at the document, disbelief warring with a rising tide of cold fury. Julian Vance? I've never heard of him hung heavy on the line. Ethan couldn't breathe. His house, the one place he thought was secure, solely. And I sure as hell never signed any deed. Look closer, Ethan, Chloe said quietly, zooming in on the signature line bearing in his name. Transferred? Chloe, he finally managed, his voice hoarse. It's a forgery, Finch, Vance. Rhea. They forged my signature. They tried to steal my house before I even his name. He peered at it. It looked like his signature. The general shape was right. But then he saw it got sick. I suspected as much, Chloe said, her professional tone returning, now laced with steel. I encouraged the slight tremor in a loop where his was usually smooth, the pressure heavier on the downstroke. It was a forgery, like pulled Finch's record with the State Bar Association. He was disbarred 2 years ago for exactly this. Fraudulent notar, the one on the loan guarantee in the previous story's scenario, but this one aimed for the ultimate prize, his homizations, involvement in property scams. How he managed to get this deed filed is something we need to investigate urgently, but the That's not mine, he stated flatly. Chloe pointed to the bottom of the document. And fact remains, they didn't just drain your account while you were dying, Ethan. They actively tried to steal the look who notarized Ms. Wallace's signature and this Ethan McConnell signature. The notary stamp bore the name Arthur Finch. Chloe did a quick search on her legal database. Arthur Finch, disbarred 3 years ago for ethics roof over your head weeks earlier, using a disbarred official and naming the boyfriend as the recipient under the guise of family violations, including falsifying documents. Apparently, he's still practicing his trade, just without the license. This changes everything. This is felony territory. Ethan closed his eyes, the room seeming to tilt. The betrayal wasn't a single act of desperation or greed triggered by his illness. It was a cold, calculated, multi-stage pieces slammed together in Ethan's mind with sickening force. The systematic draining of accounts. The timing of the deed-filing conspiracy involving his wife, her lover, and a corrupt legal professional aimed at stripping him bare. The exhaustion he'd felt earlier was replaced by a just before his medical crisis. The use of a disbarred notary. The distant cousin likely being Rhea's lover. The guy the neighbor Harold had mentioned, if Harold existed in this version, or perhaps just a guy. Surge of adrenaline, a chilling focus. They hadn't just wounded him. They had declared total war. The courtroom buzzed with the low-level hum of preliminary hearings. Lawyers conferring quietly, clerks shuffling papers, the general air of procedural bureaucracy. Ethan sat beside Chloe at the plaintiff's table, wearing his one good suit, retrieved by Nate from the house, feeling exposed and uncomfortably formal under the fluorescent lights. Across the aisle sat Rhea, flanked by her attorney Davenport. She projected an aura of strained composure, occasionally dabbing her eyes with a tissue, a performance clearly aimed at the periphery, perhaps for Judge Langston when he arrived. Julian Vance was nowhere in sight, likely advised to stay clear. This hearing wasn't the full divorce trial, but a crucial preliminary session focused on Chloe's emergency motions, freezing the disputed $61,438.72, addressing the potential fraud surrounding the house transfer, and requesting temporary exclusive use of the home for Ethan, given his medical state and Rhea's actions. Judge Langston entered, a stern, experienced jurist known for his no-nonsense approach, especially in cases involving potential exploitation. He settled behind the bench, reviewed the submitted motions briefly, and peered over his glasses at the attorneys. Ms. Preston, Mr. Davenport, let's address the motion to freeze the funds withdrawn from the joint account during Mr. McConnell's hospitalization. Chloe stood, presenting the timeline, the hospital records documenting Ethan's incapacity, and the bank statements showing the systematic depletion. Davenport countered, reiterating Rhea's emotional distress, her right to joint funds, and attempting to deflect by raising the issue of Ethan refinancing the house secretly, a point Chloe quickly rebutted by stating Ethan handled it alone because Rhea declined to participate. The arguments were tense, but followed predictable legal lines. Ethan watched, feeling strangely detached, like observing a play about his own life. It was during Davenport's rebuttal, as he was attempting to paint Ethan as distant and financially secretive, that Chloe's phone, lying face down on the table, vibrated discreetly. She glanced at the screen, her eyes narrowing almost imperceptibly. It was a prearranged alert from her paralegal monitoring incoming communications flagged as urgent. While Davenport continued speaking, Chloe subtly checked the full message under the table. Ethan saw her expression shift, a flicker of disbelief, quickly followed by sharp, focused anger. As Davenport concluded, Chloe rose again, holding her phone discreetly. Your Honor, before we proceed, a related and deeply concerning matter has just come to my attention regarding Mr. McConnell's life insurance policy, which may bear directly on Ms. Wallace's state of mind and intentions during the period in question. Davenport objected instantly. Objection, Your Honor. Relevance? This is a fishing expedition. Overruled for now. Proceed cautiously, Miss. Preston, Judge Langston said, intrigued. My office was just contacted by North Star Mutual, Mr. McConnell's life insurance provider, Chloe stated, her voice steady but laced with ice. They received an email request 2 days before Mr. McConnell's cardiac event, purportedly from him, requesting a change of primary beneficiary from his brother, Nathaniel McConnell, to his wife, Rhea Wallace. The request also sought to significantly increase the policy's payout value. A low murmur went through the few observers in the courtroom. Rhea went visibly rigid beside Davenport. Chloe continued. The email included an attachment, a scanned handwritten note, presented as a suicide note, dated the same day as the email. It speaks of despair, financial ruin, and asks that Rhea be taken care of. She paused, letting the implication sink in. North Star flagged the request as highly suspicious given the timing relative to Mr. McConnell's subsequent near-fatal medical emergency and the unusual nature of the attached note. They paused the request pending verification. Ethan felt the blood pound in his ears. A suicide note? Beneficiary change? The timing, just before his heart gave out. It was monstrous. This is outrageous, Davenport spluttered, clearly blindsided. My client knows nothing about this. It's likely a fabrication by Mr. Wallace himself to— A fabrication, Mr. Davenport? Chloe cut him off sharply. We immediately requested forensic analysis. The email originated from an IP address traced directly to the main office computer at Serenity Spa, the business Ms. Wallace manages. Furthermore, she placed printed enlargements on the overhead projector, one of the forged note, one of a known sample of Ethan's handwriting from a legal document. Preliminary handwriting analysis indicates these signatures and the body of the note are inconsistent with Mr. McConnell's known hand. They do, however, share characteristics with Miss Wallace's signature on file. All eyes turned to Rhea, whose face was now paper white, her eyes wide with panic. She started shaking her head violently, whispering frantically to Davenport. Chloe turned to Ethan. Mr. McConnell, did you, at any time, send an email to North Star Mutual requesting a change of beneficiary or an increase in policy value? Did you write this note? She gestured to the projection of the forged letter. Ethan looked directly at Judge Langston, his voice hoarse but clear. No, Your Honor, absolutely not. I have never contemplated suicide. I never wrote that note, nor did I authorize any changes to my life insurance. My brother has always been, and remains, my beneficiary. Judge Langston stared intently at Rhea, then at the documents Chloe had presented. The air in the courtroom crackled with tension. The case had just escalated dramatically, moving beyond financial dispute into the realm of something far more sinister. A potential plot involving feigned suicide and insurance fraud, orchestrated while a man lay dying. The judge's expression hardened, his gaze settling on Rhea with palpable displeasure. The predictable arguments about joint accounts suddenly seemed trivial. Judge Langston's chambers were paneled in dark wood, lined with law books, projecting an aura of somber authority far more intense than the open courtroom. The air felt thick with anticipation. Ethan sat beside Chloe, his hands resting calmly on the polished table, though his heart hammered against his ribs. Across from them, Rhea looked diminished, her earlier attempts at composure replaced by a visible tremor. Davenport, her attorney, appeared grim, shuffling papers with little conviction. He knew this meeting, requested by Chloe to present sensitive evidence directly to the judge, was unlikely to go well for his client. Ms. Preston, Judge Langston began, his voice devoid of preliminary pleasantries, his eyes sharp behind his reading glasses. You indicated you have further evidence pertinent to the emergency motions and the overall nature of this case. Proceed. Chloe nodded, standing with quiet confidence. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. The evidence spoke for itself. She began systematically, laying out printed documents, and occasionally referencing her laptop connected to a monitor facing the judge. Your Honor, further investigation confirms not only the illicit draining of the joint account during Mr. McConnell's incapacitation, but a broader pattern of deception and fraud. First, she placed the statements from Rhea's hidden account on the table. We have confirmation of this undisclosed account, funded over 18 months with diverted marital assets totaling over $127,000. Significant portions were then transferred to Vance Enterprises, LLC, owned by Mr. Julian Vance, whom Ms. Wallace initially described as a distant cousin. She paused, then played a short, clear video clip on the monitor, the footage Nate's PI had obtained. It showed Rhea and Julian Vance kissing passionately outside a restaurant, then entering an apartment building together. Mr. Vance, it appears, is not merely a cousin receiving financial support. Rhea flushed crimson. Davenport made a motion to object based on relevance, but Judge Langston waved him silent, his eyes fixed on the evidence Chloe was presenting. Second, Chloe continued, sliding over the copy of the quitclaim deed, alongside a detailed forensic handwriting analysis report. The fraudulent transfer of Mr. McConnell's home. The signature is confirmed as a forgery. The recipient, Mr. Vance, is Ms. Wallace's paramour. And the notary, Arthur Finch, was disbarred years ago for similar fraudulent activities, suggesting a deliberate conspiracy to steal Mr. McConnell's primary residence. Judge Langston's expression darkened further. He looked from the deed to Rhea, whose eyes darted frantically between the judge and her lawyer. And third, Your Honor, Chloe's voice dropped slightly, taking on a graver tone, the matter of the life insurance policy. She outlined the attempted beneficiary change, the fraudulent increase request, and the forged suicide note, presenting the IP trace evidence from Rhea's spa computer and the definitive handwriting analysis concluding Ethan did not write the note. This attempt, made just 2 days before Mr. McConnell suffered a near-fatal cardiac event, suggests an intent far beyond simple financial gain. It suggests an attempt to capitalize on his potential death, facilitated by a forged declaration of suicidal intent. Davenport jumped to his feet. Your Honor, this is conjecture. Character assassination. There's no proof, Ms. Wallace intended. Mr. Davenport, Judge Langston interrupted, his voice dangerously low. Your client's actions paint a very disturbing picture. Attempting to change a life insurance beneficiary based on a forged suicide note days before the insured nearly dies. What other interpretation would you suggest? He fixed his gaze on Rhea. Mrs. Doyle, did you believe your husband was going to die? Rhea stammered. No. Of course not. I was stressed. That note, maybe Ethan did write it in a dark moment. It was then that Ethan spoke, his voice quiet, but carrying immense weight in the tense room. Your Honor, he said, addressing the judge directly. He reached into a briefcase Chloe handed him and pulled out a heavy sealed envelope, bearing the official stamp of a different notary public, dated 4 years prior. 4 years ago, Ethan continued, his gaze steady. After a bad accident involving a colleague on the road, I worried about what might happen to me. I wrote a letter detailing my wishes, primarily concerning my brother Nate, and ensuring my parents were cared for if something happened. It addresses financial matters, yes, but mostly personal ones. It was witnessed, notarized, and placed in my secure deposit box, with instructions for Nate to open it only upon my death or incapacitation. He slid the sealed envelope across the table towards the judge. This is that letter, Your Honor. My real thoughts from 4 years ago, legally documented. I ask you to compare its tone, its content, and its legitimate signature and notarization to the fraudulent, desperate documents submitted to the insurance company. Chloe added, We have the notary who witnessed this letter available to testify, Your Honor. Judge Langston took the envelope, broke the seal, and read the contents silently. The contrast between Ethan's thoughtful, pragmatic, and affectionate letter to his brother and the clumsily forged suicide note filled with false despair was stark. He finished reading, laid the letter down, removed his glasses, and leveled a look of cold fury at Rhea. Mrs. Doyle, he said, his voice resonating with judicial outrage. You didn't just try to steal your husband's money while he lay dying. You didn't just conspire to fraudulently take his home. You attempted to exploit his near-death situation, using a forged suicide note to potentially profit from his life insurance. You sought to declare your husband legally and emotionally dead while he was fighting to survive. He didn't wait for a response. He turned to the lawyers. Based on the overwhelming evidence presented, financial fraud, forgery, conspiracy, potential insurance fraud, and the exploitation of a vulnerable individual, I am issuing the following temporary orders, effective immediately. 1. Exclusive use and possession of the marital home located at address is granted solely to Mr. Ethan McConnell. Ms. Wallace is to vacate the premises within 48 hours if she has not already done so. 2. All known assets, bank accounts, investment accounts, and business interests currently held by Miss Rhea Wallace, either solely or jointly, including the hidden account ending in 473B and any assets held by Vance Enterprises LLC traceable to marital funds, are hereby frozen. Access is denied without further court order. 3. Ms. Preston, I expect a full accounting of the diverted funds and liquidated assets to be submitted promptly. 4. Mr. Davenport. The judge's gaze was icy. Advise your client that while this court is primarily concerned with the equitable dissolution of the marriage, the evidence presented today strongly suggests criminal conduct. I am seriously considering referring this entire matter to the District Attorney's Office for investigation into charges including, but not limited to, forgery, wire fraud, insurance fraud, and conspiracy. Rhea made a small, strangled sound, looking utterly broken. Davenport looked like he wanted the floor to swallow him whole. Judge Langston looked back at Ethan, a flicker of something almost like sympathy in his eyes. Mr. McConnell, the court recognizes the egregious circumstances you have endured. These orders are intended to provide immediate protection. We will proceed with the divorce expeditiously. The climax wasn't a shouting match or a dramatic confession from Rhea. It was the cold, hard weight of meticulously gathered evidence, the quiet dignity of Ethan's real letter, and the swift, decisive hammer of judicial consequence crashing down on a web of lies. The control Rhea had sought through deceit was utterly lost, replaced by the court's control, firmly on Ethan's side. The air tasted clean, sharp with salt, and the scent of damp Sitka spruce. 3 months had passed since the final, swift judgment in Judge Langston's chambers. Ethan McConnell stood on the small porch of a rented bungalow overlooking a rugged stretch of the Oregon coast. Waves crashed against dark, volcanic rocks below, a constant, soothing rhythm against the vastness of the Pacific. The relentless prairie flatness of South Dakota felt like a distant memory, replaced by towering evergreens and the endless, dynamic ocean. He looked healthier. The gauntness from his hospital stay was gone, replaced by the lean fitness of someone walking beaches and coastal trails daily. The haunted look in his eyes had softened, replaced by a quiet calm, though the experience had etched lines of wisdom there that hadn't existed before. Nate was visiting for a long weekend, lounging in an Adirondack chair beside him, sipping coffee. He looked relaxed, the tension that had mirrored Ethan's own ordeal finally gone from his shoulders. "Place suits you," Nate commented, gesturing towards the dramatic coastline with his mug. "A hell of a lot better than Sioux Falls anyway." Ethan nodded slowly. "It's peaceful. Needed the change. Needed the ocean, I think. Something bigger than—" He didn't need to finish the sentence. "Heard anything?" Nate asked quietly after a moment. It was the code they used, referring to Rhea and the fallout. "Chloe keeps me updated legally," Ethan said. "The divorce is finalized, obviously. The criminal referrals for Rhea, Vance, and Finch are proceeding, but slowly. Vance apparently fled the country. Finch is cooperating, trying to save his own skin. Rhea declared bankruptcy, lost the spa. Facing multiple fraud charges. Last Chloe heard, she was working a minimum wage job somewhere back east, living with relatives." He sighed, not with satisfaction, but with a weariness for the wreckage left behind. "Doesn't really matter anymore." "She got what she deserved," Nate said gruffly, though without heat. "Maybe," Ethan allowed, "but holding on to that anger, it felt like letting her still have a piece of me. I needed to let it go. Focus on rebuilding." He took a deep breath of the clean sea air. "Which reminds me." He went inside briefly and returned with his checkbook and a pen. He sat down and wrote out a check, carefully filling in the details. He showed it to Nate. The payee was the Coastal Justice Project, and the amount was substantial. A significant portion of the funds recovered from Rhea's hidden account after legal fees. Nate whistled softly. "Wow, Ethan, that's generous." "It's Chloe's pro bono clinic," Ethan explained. "She started it a couple of years ago, helps low-income families with housing disputes, domestic issues, people facing situations where the system feels stacked against them." She mentioned needing funding for a new paralegal. He paused, looking at the check. "Feels right. Using money that was meant to destroy me to help people fight back, to have access to the kind of help I was lucky enough to afford." He saw it not as charity, but as reinvesting in the very system that, however flawed, had ultimately protected him when he was most vulnerable. It was a way to close the circle, to extract meaning from the ordeal beyond mere survival. Supporting the mechanism of justice felt like the most fitting end to his personal battle. "Dad would be proud," Nate said quietly, clapping his brother gently on the shoulder. Later that evening, after Nate had turned in, Ethan sat alone on the porch as darkness enveloped the coast. The rhythmic crash of the waves was a constant companion. He thought about the future. He wasn't planning to go back to long-haul trucking. His heart, while stable, wouldn't take that strain again. He was exploring options, maybe consulting part-time for a logistics company locally, maybe finally pursuing his old hobby of woodworking more seriously. For the first time in decades, the path wasn't dictated by grueling schedules or financial pressures built around someone else's expectations. It was his to choose. He didn't feel the sharp sting of betrayal anymore, nor the consuming fire of revenge. Those emotions had burned themselves out, leaving behind the quiet embers of hard-won peace. He had faced death, faced deceit of the cruelest kind, and somehow navigated through it. He was scarred, yes, but not broken. He was redefined. He looked up at the vast, star-dusted sky arching over the dark ocean. He felt small, but not insignificant. He felt anchored, not by possessions or relationships defined by others, but by his own resilience, his own rediscovered sense of purpose. The future wasn't a destination he was racing towards, but a landscape unfolding before him, vast and full of potential, waiting to be explored at his own pace. He took another deep breath, tasting the salt on the wind. He was starting fresh, truly fresh, and the ocean seemed to whisper its agreement with the turning tide autumn had begun to paint the Oregon coastline with strokes of gold and russet. The relentless roar of the Pacific, once just a backdrop to Ethan's healing solitude, now felt like a familiar, grounding rhythm. He sat on the porch of the small bungalow, not rented anymore, but purchased with a portion of the assets he'd fought so hard to reclaim. He was sanding a piece of driftwood, his hands moving with a slow, deliberate rhythm, finding a simple satisfaction in the tangible work, a world away from logistics charts and legal battles. His phone buzzed on the small table beside him. Caller ID, Chloe Preston. He smiled faintly and answered. Ethan, hope I'm not interrupting your woodworking empire. Chloe's voice came through, warm and professional as always, but with an underlying friendliness forged through their shared ordeal. Just coaxing some character out of this driftwood, Chloe. What's up? Just wanted to give you the final update, she said. Rhea took the plea deal on the fraud charges, probation, significant restitution mandated, but avoided jail time given her cooperation against Finch. Finch, however, wasn't so lucky, facing serious time. Vance was finally apprehended trying to re-enter the country under a false passport. And the Coastal Justice Project, her voice brightened, wanted me to pass on their immense gratitude again. Your donation funded that new paralegal and helped them win a major housing rights case last week. Ethan felt a quiet warmth spread through him, unrelated to the afternoon sun. That's really good to hear, Chloe. About the clinic, I mean. He paused, the news about Rhea and the others registering with a distant echo rather than a sharp pang. And the rest? Well, consequences have a way of finding people, I suppose. There was no triumph in his voice, only a quiet acceptance of the scales finally settling. They certainly do, Chloe agreed. So legally speaking, Ethan, it's well and truly over. You're completely clear. Free and clear. Free and clear, Ethan echoed, looking out at the vast expanse of the ocean stretching towards the horizon. Thanks, Chloe, for everything. You did the hard work, Ethan. You stayed strong. Just glad I could help navigate the legal storms. After a few more pleasantries, they hung up. Ethan put the phone down and returned his gaze to the ocean, the piece of driftwood forgotten in his lap. Free and clear. The words resonated deeply. He thought back to the man lying helpless in that hospital bed, tethered to machines, his life and finances seemingly evaporating before his eyes. He thought of the cold betrayal, the calculated cruelty, the exhausting fight for what was rightfully his. It would have been easy, he mused, to let bitterness take root, to allow the desire for vengeance to consume the years ahead, tracking every misfortune that befell Rhea and her cohorts. But somewhere along the way, amidst the legal battles and the quiet healing, he'd realized something profound. Perhaps, he thought, feeling the sun warm on his face, the salt spray cool on his skin, the ultimate measure of a life isn't the absence of storms, but the strength found in rebuilding after they pass. We cannot control the betrayals life throws at us, the unexpected heartbreaks, the moments the ground vanishes beneath our feet. We can only control our response. He hadn't chosen the heart attack. He hadn't chosen Rhea's deceit or the conspiracy that followed. But he had chosen to fight back, not with blind rage, but with calculated resolve. He had chosen to seek justice, not just vengeance. And crucially, he had chosen, finally, to let go. Not forgiving, perhaps, but refusing to carry the weight of their poison any longer. The true freedom wasn't just in reclaiming his assets. It was in reclaiming himself. It was understanding that his worth wasn't tied to a bank balance, a house, or the validation of another person, especially one who saw him merely as a means to an end. His worth lay in his resilience, his integrity, his capacity to endure, and, ultimately, to choose a different path forward. He picked up the driftwood again, feeling the smooth, sea-worn texture. Like this piece of wood, he had been battered, thrown against the rocks, submerged in the depths. But the storm hadn't destroyed him. It had simply stripped away the non-essential, revealing the enduring grain beneath. He could sand it, shape it, turn it into something new, something beautiful, something entirely his own. He smiled, a genuine, unburdened smile, and looked towards the endless horizon where the sea met the sky. The future was no longer a terrifying void, but an open expanse, waiting. And he was ready to navigate it.